Okay. Welcome to session number, let me look here, 15 of Genesis in Depth. I'm Dr. John McMath, and I'm joined here by my friends in Italy and in the Philippines. And it's always a pleasure to get this group together. We're all over the world. We're studying in Genesis, have been at this for a little while. And today we'll be in chapters 13 and probably on into 14, just continuing the life of Abraham. But what we're seeing here is a couple of fairly important things. One, we're seeing a foreshadowing of what will happen later with Lot and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. We're also seeing here a reaffirmation of the Abrahamic covenant. So we see how important this thing is and why the land matters. There's more details, and we're going to see a bit more going on there. So, without further ado, let me see if I can make the share screen come up. Yeah, there it is. And bingo. Okay, it's trying to make me little. There it goes, and there's some background. This shot is taken from the central highlands of Israel. That city that you see in the distance is the Arab city of Baitin, not too far from Ramallah. It's part of what we call the occupied territories or the West Bank. The Jordanians like to call it the West Bank of the Jordan River, and this was part of their land, they thought. In fact, this is a part of the original Balfour Declaration provision of land for a Jewish home in the Middle East. So this is Judea and Samaria. And this particular area is a part of the land given to the tribe of Benjamin. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So what we have going on here in chapter 13 of Genesis, we see that Abram and Sarai and the rest of the crowd went straight through Canaan from north to south. They came out the south end of Canaan and headed along the coast to Egypt and found there, I'm sure, pastures for their flocks. That's where Abraham lied about Sarah being his sister. That that particular lie was out of a hope for self-preservation. He had a low opinion of the pagan rulers in Egypt and was concerned that they might kill him and steal his wife. So just to make sure that that didn't happen, he said, "This is my sister." And so the Pharaoh or the Pharaoh's household took Sarah to join the household of Pharaoh. And of course, that would have meant that she would be taken as a wife by one or more of the men in Pharaoh's household. Not a good thing to do. That resulted in a variety of plagues upon the nation of Egypt and the household there. And so it is Pharaoh who rebukes Abram. Very interesting. Abram is the man of faith. He's the righteous man here. He's the godly man. And yet he is rebuked by a pagan. Great stuff. You can't make this up. But at any rate, Pharaoh commanded his men, which is the right thing to do. They escorted him away. I mean, they set, horsemen on both sides. with his wife and all that belonged to him. He didn't lose a thing going into Egypt. The Egyptians behaved with more honor than Abram did. It's a harsh rebuke, really, and is a reminder to us that Abram was not saved because he was a good man. Abram was saved by the grace of God, just the way we are. None of us are ever saved by our good works. We can't be. So some important stuff when it makes for an important transition. In verse 1 of chapter 13, we see Abram journeying again. He went up from Egypt to the Negev. The word Negev means the south land. It's the land south of, more or less, the capital city of the Negev is Beersheba, which would not have been much of any place at the time that Abram came through. The northernmost boundary of the Negev is Hebron. Hebron is actually not in the Negev, it's in the hill country, but it's the biggest city in that area that give us a north boundary. At the south side, the Negev is bounded by the Sinai wilderness. So if you go far enough south, there's simply no water at all. The Negev is a desert, no doubt about it, but it's less dry than either the Sinai wilderness or the great Saudi Arabian desert. That's huge, huge desert wilderness to the south of the Negev. In the Negev wilderness, there is occasional pasture land. It's possible, and the Bedouin today prove that it's possible to keep sheep and goats down there. Sheep and goats nibble at whatever is around, and they move fairly large distances in a day's eating. And out in the desert, in a place like the Negev, when the shepherds see off in the distance that there's rain falling, 8 or 10 kilometers away in the desert, flat land, you can see the clouds forming and the rain coming down. And they'll pick up camp and begin driving their sheep, and the sheep will get there in a couple of days. And by that time, a little bit of grass will have come up, and they'll eat that until it's all gone. And then the shepherd will move on. He'll find something else. Uh, it's not rich pasture land, but it can be done. And we find that the patriarchs uh, move all the way from the Beersheba area, which is the Negev, as far north as perhaps Shechem or the Jezreel Valley in the north. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. So the whole crowd is staying together. And it's also an emphasis at the beginning of chapter 13 that Abram lost nothing in his time in Egypt. And as a matter of fact, he has become a very rich man. Now, Abram, verse 2, was very rich in livestock, also in silver and in gold. Silver and gold are mentioned not only in the Bible, but also in the secular literature of the time. When anyone gained enough wealth in terms of sheep, goats, camels, servants, whatever, some of that could be sold in return for the value in precious metals, silver and gold. In much of the ancient Near East, the silver and gold that was was taken in return for the sale of animals and other things could be converted into idols. We don't know that Abram did that. He may have simply kept what metals he had as uh, small lumps of metal that could be weighed. And so you think about your wealth in terms of the weight of the various metals, the silver and the gold. And then, of course, also um, his sheep and goats. Now, you'll notice that Abram doesn't own land. He's a nomad of sorts, not quite like the Ishmaelites are nomads. They're camel nomads. And Abraham had camels, but he doesn't seem to be the vast wilderness crossing nomad. His wanderings are going to be north and south along the watershed line from roughly the Jezreel Valley in the north as far south as Beersheba. Later on, Israel will be defined as from Dan to Beersheba, but we haven't introduced the city of Dan yet. We'll see that later. This route along the central ridge of the mountain spine of Israel is called the watershed route, or it's called the patriarchal highway. When we say patriarchal highway, we're saying that this is the general area where uh, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and later Joseph would carry out their activities. This is where they lived, and they went north and south on this. All three of the patriarchs and Joseph were nomadic shepherds. They grew up around sheep and goats. Generally, they were like like other people in the area. They would have worn beards because it's just easier that way. They would have worn long robes for protection from the sun, less than for warmth. In the desert, it can be very hot during the day and the sun can be relentless. But at night, the temperatures can go down rapidly. So it's not unusual to find the desert Bedouin walking around in fairly heavy duty camel hair um, garments. It's just a long flowing robe. That's protection from the sun, but also something to wrap up in at night. And it's a fairly common thing to see even today. Although sometimes you'll see the Bedouin driving a pickup truck, and they just turn up the air conditioning or open a window. So Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. The modifier here, very rich, tells us that Abram stood apart from his contemporaries. He had more wealth than Lot, for example, and probably more than most people at the time. In order to become wealthy, raising sheep and goats, you've got to be a hard worker. This is not this is not a desk job. You you don't hire people to do this for you. It's going to be servants in your own household, and you'll have to take care of them. Uh, when most men have children, those children would grow up as shepherds. It was one of the earliest jobs anybody could have. So, uh, Abram in verse 3 continued on his journeyings, that which is the way it worked. From Negev as far as Bethel. Bethel means house of God. And I'm not sure that it had that name at the time that Abram was there. We've already seen that name before. Uh, and Abram camped there between Ai and Bethel. Uh, Now, Bethel and Ai are difficult to locate. We're not entirely sure. Well, some of us are more sure than others, but this has been a controversial issue for Old Testament scholars for many years. Uh, in the years between World War I and II, an archaeologist named William Albright identified the city of Baitin, which you see in the distance in this shot, as Bethel. And he was sure that it was the right place, even though it's not on the watershed route. It's about 2 miles off. It doesn't include a temple to a golden calf, which is going to be necessary. But both at Dan and Bethel, Jeroboam, the first of the northern king, or of the southern, first of the northern kings, um, built temples both at Bethel in the south and Dan in the north. And we found the temple at Dan. It's very prominent, very large, very elaborate. Nothing similar was found at Baitin. Uh, those of us who believe that the Bible is in fact accurate have been looking for both Bethel and Ai in a different spot. If Baitin is the right place, then the traditional location of Ai is a place called Et Tel, which has none of the right layers. So a Baitin Et Tel identification doesn't work very well. We think it's elsewhere. Uh, and I'm not going to go a whole lot further down that rabbit trail, but there are several good suggestions for the location of Bethel and Ai. Ai has been searched for in several places. The most likely one is several miles away from the spot where I was standing taking this picture. The probable site for Bethel is in the modern Arab city of Ramallah. As a matter of fact, in Yasser Arafat's palace grounds, a place called El Bira that is most likely the proper site of Bethel, but we've never been able to excavate it. So, for obvious reasons. Uh, so he went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel. And along the way, he would have passed Hebron in the southern part of the hill country. He would have passed Jerusalem, which is at that time a fairly large walled city. That, as far as we know, there was a wall there to 2000 and some odd BC. He would have traveled on the road leading toward Shechem, and about halfway along there is Bethel and Ai. And there would not have been much of anything there at the time. But later on, it gets the name Bethel actually from Jacob quite a bit later, and becomes a city only later on. The Canaanites are going to build a place at Bethel. So he came to that place, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. So this is one of Abram's places. And there, Abram called on the name of the Lord. So he rebuilt his altar, which would have been a temporary stone platform, no cut stones, just piled rocks. Uh, and he called on the name of the Lord. That's a formal term. It means that he set up an altar for sacrifices where the whole clan could gather together for feast days. A feast would be declared uh, whenever there were lambs or goats that needed slaughtering. Uh, and it would not have been a terribly formal thing. Uh, the uh, the animal would be killed. A portion of it would be burnt on that altar. The blood would be drained out. The meat would be divided up amongst the families who were there. Uh, and everything had to be eaten fairly quickly before it would spoil. So he came there to the altar, which he had formerly had there, and called on the name of the Lord. Now, Lot, who went with Abram, verse 5, also had flocks and herds and tents. Okay, so several different flocks with a household servant keeping track of each flock and each herd, and people to help with setting up tents and tearing down tents, and camel drivers and all the rest. So the group around Abram is actually getting to be quite a lot of people. And the land could not sustain them while dwelling together. As you can see, just looking around from this spot where I stopped to get out and take a picture, the trees are short. The grass, this would be during the summer, is very dry. There would not be much here for sheep and goats to eat. This is considerably less to eat than you'll find farther south, or considerably more to eat than you'd find south in the Negev. The reason they went from the south toward the north is that the weather is wetter the farther north you get. You can see some bits of green in this photograph, but there's not much. Very little of this is helpful for sheep and goats. Their possessions were so great they were not able to remain together, and there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Okay, that's expected. Everybody needs to feed and water their goats and sheep. Everybody needs that. It's their job. Yeah, so they will fight for pasture land. And Abram understood that there was a problem here. But interestingly, at the end of verse 7, there's a historical note. Now, the Canaanite and the Perizzite were dwelling then in the land. Now, the Canaanite we know is that grouping that sprouts from the line of Ham. This is that northeastern corner of the Hamitic inheritance. And the son of Ham named Canaan is living there, and he's still under the curse of God. So God is not dealing with Canaan. The Perizzite is a related but different group. Perizzite means the sons of Perez, and it's not Perez, who is the one during whose lifetime the land was separated or the earth was divided. This is rather what would be the term Perizzite means one who dwells in the desert. So we don't know who these people are. We can't really identify them with any other groups, but we see the name fairly frequently in what's called the ethnic catalog or the nation list of people groups who live in the promised land. We're going to run into them. Canaanites we have no trouble with. We know who they are. Uh, Amorites we can find very easily. Girgashites, uh, we can find them, but the Perizzites we're not so sure about. So Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers." Okay, that's a proper thing to say. Uh, what Abraham is doing here is sacrificing his convenience in favor of his uh, nephew Lot. So let there be no strife between us. Is not the whole land before you, in verse 9? Please separate from me. If to the left, I will go to the right. If to the right, I will go to the left. So this is more or less the vista that they had when they had this conversation. Now, they may have been farther over near an edge where they could see more of it, but it is what it is. Yeah, so Lot looked toward the valley of the Jordan. Now, if you go to the Jordan Valley today, you'll find that Jordan River starts way in the north in the mountains of that separate Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. Mount Hermon is the largest of the peaks in the north. The Jordan River flows into the south down a rift valley. The Rift Valley is a place where the sandstone on one side and the limestone on the other side have opened up, and a valley has dropped out of the middle. Uh, the river runs through the Hula Valley to the Sea of Galilee, which is itself 200 meters below sea level. The Jordan runs out of the Sea of Galilee, 200 meters below sea level, all the way down the upper or the middle Jordan Valley, past Jericho, into the Dead Sea, which is 400 meters below sea level, the lowest spot on Earth. And that low spot uh, collects the waters that flow down the Jordan River, and there's no outlet. The water evaporates, and that means that it just gets thicker and thicker and thicker. The Sea of Galilee has an outlet. Water comes in, water goes out. The water is not quite perfectly fresh. There is a high mineral content in the Sea of Galilee, but it's not salty. You can't taste the salt in the Sea of Galilee, but it is really, really good for fish. They really like Sea of Galilee has to this day has a lot of fish, and they're good to eat. So here we are um, today, and we look down into the Jordan Valley, and it's mostly very dry, and particularly in the south around the Dead Sea, it's almost completely unlivable. There's very few springs of water that flow into the Dead Sea Basin. So what is going on here? Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. Okay, because the Jordan at the time that Abram and Lot looked down, probably 2,000 some odd years BC, 2,100 years before Christ. They looked out over this broad Jordan Valley, and it was well watered everywhere. the same mountains in the north were providing water, but they flowed all the way south and went into the salt water at the Red Sea in the Gulf of Eilat. So there was an outlet, and rain came, and the various streams flowed into the Jordan Valley along its full length, and there was plenty of water, and everything was green and very pretty. Uh, so that's the picture that is given here. Now, what we have to ask the question, well, what happened? Now, of course, if you've read your Bibles, you know what happened. In Genesis 19, we're going to see the destruction of the cities of the plain. Uh, and we're told that um, that Lot lifted up his eyes. He saw the Jordan Valley, and this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord. Okay, so it was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, which is like the Garden of Eden, or like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. Now, Zoar is most likely an Egyptian city in what we call the Delta. The Nile Delta is um, really quite beautiful if you like to grow things. Lots of water. The Nile is split up into dozens of minor tributaries going out into the Mediterranean there, and lots of fertile, low-lying, very well-watered land with everything growing, palm trees, all kinds of stuff. Anything you plant will grow uh, all year long. Beautiful place if you're a farmer, and that would be what the Dead Sea looked like. Now, later, I'm going to show you some pictures around the Dead Sea, and what it is today is quite literally a wasteland. Water runs into the Dead Sea; it only evaporates out. So vast pans of salt are formed, and those are mined today to get a variety of different kinds of minerals, including cobalt and lithium for batteries. Funny thing. The Israelis and the Jordanians, who live on opposite sides of the Dead Sea, both have plants down there to produce lithium for batteries because there's a lot of money in lithium. Uh, and Lot took a look at this, and he thought this looked like a good place. And so Lot chose for himself all of the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed to the eastward, and thus they separated from one another. And Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Okay, now the city of Sodom was an actual city. There were 5 cities in this region, and archaeologists for many years have been searching for the location of Sodom. We find names in the region that reflect the original names of the 5 cities of the plain. We find several large um, burial grounds, cemeteries, more or less, uh, from people groups who lived in this region prior to Israel. There is no city close by the largest of these. So we're assuming relatively nomadic people groups or small bands of people living in various places would come to this area near the Dead Sea for burial of their dead. But there's a lot of questions. The specific places we don't know. One of the interesting things we discovered Oh my, it's 50 years ago now. Yeah, it used to be the latest greatest thing, but it's half a century ago. Some Italian archaeologists, very important guys, Matthei and Pettinato, uh, from uh, the Vatican archaeology school, came to Israel and came to the region, and they ended up in Syria, which is just to the east of Israel. They came to Syria and began digging at a place on the Euphrates River called Ebla, Ebla, and nobody'd ever heard of it before, except people who had read the cuneiform from Mesopotamia. Uh, the the Mesopotamian records say that Ebla is that great city on the Euphrates River that mastered an empire that existed from the time of the flood. And the Mesopotamian literature doesn't say which flood. It just says that Ebla was a great city, great empire that has its roots as early as the flood. When we dig at Ebla, or when Matthei and Pettinato dug at Ebla, and others since then have done considerably more excavation, they found a whole bunch of Mesopotamian, mostly Akkadian and Sumerian literature. They also found literature in a language that was unique to Ebla, and that's called Eblaic. And I haven't seen a grammar or a vocabulary of Eblaic yet. It it will probably not happen in my lifetime. But that language uh, is very similar to Hebrew, and for that reason, its decipherment has moved along fairly quickly. Among other things, the city of Ebla had close economic ties with the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah and the others. And those cities are mentioned, the cities and their kings are mentioned in the tablets at Ebla as just in passing. Their merchants from Ebla went as far as Sodom and did business there and brought back such and such goods and spices and whatever. Uh, no terribly important things except to note that those cities were there, they were prosperous, and they were known outside of the Bible. This is one more little bit amongst many bits and pieces, isolated trivial details that demonstrate that the Bible is in fact accurate. This is a real story. So he went to Abram settled in the land of Canaan, which would be along the water route, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley, and he moved his tents as far as Sodom. He picked Sodom because that was the largest of the cities of the plain. It was the economic center, most likely. And the Lord said to Abram in verse 14, after Lot had separated from him, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Okay, so two parts of the Abrahamic covenant are emphasized here in these two verses. Uh, all of this land from the central Benjamin Highlands looking north and south and east and west. So that's real clear. Central Benjamin Highlands are about 12 miles north, 15 kilometers, 16 kilometers north of Jerusalem. So look south toward Jerusalem, look north toward Shechem and beyond, look east toward the far plains of the Jordan, and west toward the Mediterranean. And all of this, all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. This is yet another description of the land in case anybody has trouble understanding it. And it's a reiteration that this is given to you and to your descendants forever. The descendants of Abram, through Isaac, and then through Jacob, will be the people of Israel. It says, I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth. So there'll be a whole bunch of them. And this land will be your homeland. That's actually fulfilled some 500 years later when Joshua brings the people into the promised land and they set up their nation on this land. Now, during the intervening years, this was always going to be the place where the patriarchs lived until the time of Joseph, when the patriarch Jacob and 80 people who were all of the family of Abram by that time went down into Egypt, where they stayed for 430 years. But while they were in Egypt, they reminded themselves that God has promised us a land. Back in the hill country of the Ammonites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites, up in that area, we have a promised land, and that's our place, and we'll eventually go back. After 430 years, they came back. I will make your descendants. Now, a descendant is not a servant in the household and is not legally is not an offspring of a slave woman. Abraham is going to try a number of things in order to uh, figure out a way to fulfill the promise that God has given him. He's going to make mistakes along the way. And this is at the center of it. So the question is, how do we go about having descendants like the sand of the seashore if we can't have just one baby out of all of our trying through all of these years? As they're going north and south up the central plateau country, they're obviously trying to have children. They would love to have children. That's the greatest wealth that any family possesses is their children. And particularly in a nomadic society, Abram never owned land aside from the burial spot for Sarah, but he owned all of the sheep and all of the goats. And the best way to make that prosperity continue was to have children. And it just wasn't happening. God said, all this land you see, I will give to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. And then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord. The altar in Hebron is another foreshadowing. The whole story up to this point foreshadows a lot of things that are going to be filled out later in the biblical narrative. But here he comes and sets up at he's outside. He can set up his tents. He's not building a house. He built an altar, and there he called on the name of the Lord. There he offered sacrifices and had feasts for all who were his family. And this is a foreshadowing of the importance of the city of Hebron later on in Israelite history. This is the place where Abram will bury Sarah. He'll buy some land, the only property that he owned in all of the land of Canaan. And there he would build a tomb in a cave, the cave of Machpelah. And he would bury Sarah there. Later on, Abram was buried there. Still later, Isaac and Rebekah are buried there. And later on, Jacob and Leah and not all of them. Rachel is not buried there. She's buried near Bethlehem. But this is today. This is known as the tomb of the patriarchs or the cave of the patriarchs. Herod the Great built a great, awful Herodian landmark building over the top of the cave of the patriarchs, and it's still possible today to go to that general place. Archaeologists have not been able to spend a lot of time in the cave of the patriarchs. Matter of fact, all I know of for sure is one Israeli corporal, a tiny little girl who worked for Yigal Yadin, who was a colonel in the Israeli tank corps in the 1967 war. And when they got to Hebron, Yigal Yadin, who was a famous archaeologist in real life, rolled his personnel carrier up onto the platform at Hebron and went into the mosque there, which the local Arabs are still shooting, and tried to find the entrance into the tomb. He found a circular stone, pulled it away, and recognized that down below was the cave, but there was nobody in the group who was small enough to go through there. But he remembered that this little Israeli girl corporal back at headquarters was one of the best photographers that he'd had on archaeological digs, and so he got on the tactical net back to Tel Aviv and patched through to the phone line that would get to this girl's office, and gave her orders to bring her cameras and some lighting equipment and get to Hebron as quickly as she could. She jumped in an Israeli Jeep. Somebody else drove for her, and they drove with hostile fire still in the area all the way to Hebron, about a 40-minute drive. And she was lowered into the cave on a rope and got the only pictures that we have of the interior of the cave. It's a variety of big tomb-like structures made of stone called cenotaphs, and the archaic Hebrew markings on them identify the tombs of Abram and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and two of his wives. So it's a fascinating place, and it's the only place that Abraham ever actually owned. He died and was buried there. We'll see that when it comes up. So Abraham built an altar and dedicated that to the Lord. He called on the name of the Lord. The next chapter, chapter 14, I'm just going to introduce, and we'll tell this whole story next week because it's so important. Chapter 14 introduces us to a character named Melchizedek. I'm going to just give you a little hint there. This particular statue of Melchizedek is one. I was only in this spot once in the cathedral in uh, Assisi, Saint Francis of the Franciscans. Has a church built over the top of his relics in Assisi in Italy, northern Italy, south of Bologna. It's probably worth a visit. Kind of a fun place to go, although non-Catholics are not exactly uh, going to find a lot of friends there, but it's an interesting place to visit. In that cathedral out in the narthex area is this statue of Melchizedek. And he's there, and you think, well, what's Melchizedek doing in a Catholic church? Melchizedek actually has some very, very important connections to the whole story of redemption and the Old Testament um, foundations for taking the gospel to the entire world. So I'll be telling you quite a bit more about Melchizedek next week. But for now, let's let's take a look at the other part of this story. It came about. Uh, the old King James version says in it. Now it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim. These Amraphel, Arioch, Chedorlaomer, and Tidal are four kings, and they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemaber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is also called Zoar. Okay, after the place in Egypt, I would assume. Okay, so we got two bands of kings, and we should take the word king with a certain grain of salt. That is, don't take the word too seriously. Today we think of kings like King, what's his name? King Charles in England, and he's the the head of state, and he visits with Parliament, and he's known all over the world, and has a yacht, this sort of thing. Ancient Near Eastern kings were much smaller affairs. So Amraphel is a well-known name. He's the king of Shinar, which could be Sumer, the southern end of the Mesopotamian valley, or it could be someplace else much closer. Amraphel is a name that is also transliterated Hammurabi. Hammurabi was a king who actually lived much later, who was a king in Mesopotamia and gave one of the oldest law codes of the ancient Near East. Arioch is a well-known name from the era, and there are a number of kings named Arioch. Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, is also a well-known name. Title we don't see anywhere but here, and he's the king of Goyim, which is the king of the nations. So we don't really know very much about him. We know very little about any of these specifically, except that their names and the names of their locations are recorded in the ancient Near Eastern documents. They made war with these four kings or five kings of the cities of the plain. So there was a king of Sodom, and next door there was the city of Gomorrah, and its king was Bersha. That gives you a better idea of how big these kingdoms were. None of these cities were enormous, but their head man was called the king. Um, and they made war. Think of this as a kind of as tribal raiding. Okay, so the four kings from Mesopotamia came south through Syria, looking for places they could loot and plunder. That's that's what it's all about. It's not an attempt to capture everything. Uh, yeah, they weren't trying to build an empire. These kings were on camels, and they came in a big dusty cloud with all of their guys, hundreds of guys on camels, and came down and raided the cities of the plain and ran off as quickly as they could. They met in the Valley of Siddim. That is the Salt Sea. Okay, the Valley of Siddim is the location of the city of Sodom. The SDDM is the same letters, and that's how the Hebrew language works. But this is the place where the Salt Sea is now located, Moses informs us. Okay, so it's the same place. It's not as though Sodom and Gomorrah are someplace far away. They're right in the place where the Dead Sea is today. And in the 14th year of Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, they came and defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, and the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim in Shava Kiriathaim, and the Horites in Mount Zir, and as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. So they made a long trek, uh, primarily down the Jordan Valley, uh, stopped and looted and plundered wherever they went. And then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and conquered all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who lived in Hazatan Tamar. Okay, we've heard of Amalekites and Amorites. As these, we can track all of this on a map. Okay, I'm telling you all of this to let you know that this story is not made up. This is not a fairy tale. This doesn't start out with once upon a time. This really happened. Okay, it's a real raid by a number of kings heading south to carry loot back to Mesopotamia, which they would expect to divide up. We shouldn't think of this as a major war. This is not like, say, World War II with battleships and artillery and thousands and thousands of soldiers. The armies were no doubt numbered in the hundreds, if that big. And the cities were not large. The area that's covered here is not a large area, so it's actually a miniature war. And the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the king of Admah and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, came out, and they arrayed for battle against them in the valley of Siddim, against Chedorlaomer, and Tidal, and Amraphel, and Arioch, four kings against five. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell into them. But those who survived fled to the hill country. Then they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply and departed. So they drove the men away and then looted Sodom and Gomorrah. And then the really important verse, and they also took Lot, Abram's nephew, and his possessions and departed, for he was living in Sodom. That That specific line, he was living in Sodom, tells us everything that we need to know. Next week, we're going to go farther into this whole story and how it works out. But the important thing is that Lot made his choice. He picked the prosperous but ungodly cities of the plain. He wanted to go down and live where the lights are bright and where the action is hot and cold and running. He wanted to see the world. And he got to see the world all right, and all the worst of it. Uh, and he became a major player in the economic world of Sodom and Gomorrah. And that means that he was a bystander to all of the wickedness by uh, moving into this place. He was setting before himself a choice. Shall he try to spread the word of the one true God? Should he build an altar and call upon the name of the Lord as Abraham had done? Should he invite his pagan neighbors to worship with him, to come to the festival with him? Or should he assimilate to the larger pagan culture? Well, we know how it turns out. Lot became a part of the cultural heritage, if you can call it that, of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the result of that is tragedy. The first of those tragedies is right here, where he's captured and will be hauled off either to be held for ransom, which is the most common when this sort of thing happened, or to be sold as a slave. Whatever would make the most profit for these looters and plunderers of the North. So that's where we'll leave it, and we'll pick up where Abraham comes in to rescue Lot and see where the story goes from there. At this point, the important thing to understand is that Abram and Lot made their separate decisions about how they would lead their lives. Abram chose the lower prosperity route that would allow him to continue to worship God. Lot chose to abandon God and to follow the path of quick and easy riches. And he did, in fact, become a wealthy man. And we see next week what profit there was in all of that. So I'm going to quit there. We're going to say hi before. Let's see if I can make this go away. Ooh, there it goes. Yeah. Okay. And thanks for coming today. Let's see who all is here. I haven't. Oh, we got Palermo there. All right, sure. Okay, and Como is there. Good, good, good. And yeah, everybody's there. Good to see you all. Thank you for coming. Uh, love having you on
Okay, come here.
board.
You can say goodbye. Say goodbye.
We'll be in the Philippines in a few weeks. I think we leave for there on the 21st. Really looking forward to seeing how things are going there. I'm looking forward to speaking again in Manila. Thanks everyone for your prayers. We appreciate our time with you very much. God bless. Be a blessing out there, okay? Bye bye.
Grazie, Dr. Jen.
Ciao, ciao. All right. Bye.